Moving on to our next panel, I just want to introduce Meghana here. I hope Meghana is around.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Meghana.
Hi, Dr. Iyengar.
Thank you, Meghana, for being here. I'm just introducing you so that you can continue to go on to introduce your guest. Meghana Kunapareddy is a junior at Tompkins High School in Houston. She discovered a passion for sustainability through debate and now hosts podcasts regarding sustainable development, climate justice, and education called The Substantiality. She is extremely passionate about implementing climate justice in all cities and industries. In today's interview, she'll be talking to Ms. Carolyn McGrath about a plan to integrate climate justice education for K-12 students. Can't wait to hear from you, Meghana, and your interview. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Iyengar, for that introduction. So my name is Meghana Kunapareddy, and in today's interview, I and Ms. Carolyn McGrath are going to be talking about how to integrate climate justice education for kindergarten through 12th grade students. So we do have a little presentation prepared as well. I'll just share my screen for that. But basically what we're going to be talking about is the goal of this interview is to discuss how climate justice can be integrated into various grade levels without overwhelming students or oversimplifying it. And so climate justice in general is basically recognizing how there are disproportionate impacts of climate change on low-income communities and communities of color around the world. And so what me and Ms. McGrath are going to be talking about is how to teach students about climate justice and about climate change from a young age without overwhelming them or oversimplifying the topic for them. So Ms. McGrath, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn McGrath, and I'm an art educator in New Jersey. I work at Hopewell Valley Central High School, and I've been integrating climate change and climate justice into my art classes for the last several years. And I'm really excited to be here and to talk about how to integrate it into classes today. And we also have a student, Nyla, who's here as well, who's going to join us later for the conversation as well.
So before we go into the actual presentation on how to integrate climate justice education, a few facts about environmental and climate justice in the United States is that, as you can see by the slides, it does disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities across the United States and indigenous populations alongside low-income communities. So when companies and industries that have carbon emissions or toxic waste are placing their factories or industries across the US, they tend to place it in communities of color or low-income communities. And not only does this cause a lot of problems for these communities like health risks, but it also, as they move into the future, because there's so little education about it in the US education system, it's hard for these students to stand up for their own rights and for students across the world to learn about it. So in this interview, we're going to be going through 3 main grade levels: the elementary, middle school, and then to high school. So in elementary, the main focus that a climate education system that should be focused on climate justice is an introduction and focus on climate change. So there's 4 main objectives that we have. So you start off by introducing in kindergarten, where you basically introduce kindergarteners their relationship to the earth and each other, and how the environment is changing and why this is dangerous for both the world and people across both the US and the rest of the world. And then we move on to demonstrating, which is introducing the dangerous effects of pollution and toxic waste in communities, and starting to prompt discussions on whether or not child neighborhoods look similar to this, so that we emphasize empathy for other communities, even if their own communities don't face the same disparities. And then the third thing is to use representation and advocates of a similar age group, so that we can show like kindergarteners through 5th graders how differences can be made at a young age with someone of a similar age that they can relate to. And then the final objective in elementary school is to discuss. And basically, this is where we prompt micro labs or mini discussion. For older students, they can research certain aspects of climate change and then present to the class so that you're starting to introduce the concept to them in a self-learning based approach. And younger students can just have conversations with the rest of their classmates, ask their teachers questions, and voice their own thoughts on their own experience. So Ms. McGrath and I are going to talk a little bit about the challenges that could come with integrating into elementary school, but we're going to focus most of our attention on high school since that is her area of expertise. So Ms. McGrath, what do you think are some of the challenges that come with trying to, demonstrate to really young children how there are inequalities across climate education and across climate change in the U.S.?
Well, thanks for that excellent introduction. So I think I should just go and name the elephant in the room, which is in the United States, addressing issues of injustice, not just at the elementary level, but K-12 is currently controversial. What's not controversial is that young people in many communities are experiencing disproportionate impacts of toxic facilities, of unclean water sources, their air sources, proximity to oil refineries, coal production facilities. So this is a fact, right? This is a fact that some young people across the country are experiencing this. And I think, so I think it's a challenge that some educators might feel that, that perhaps this age group is too young to introduce some of these issues around climate change and around climate justice. But I think that the way the entry point is through empathy and through developing that sense of interconnectedness, both with the natural world, but with others. And that means others who might perhaps be suffering, or it might be the children themselves who might be suffering. And to allow space for the development of that empathy and the development of an ability to process feelings about really big issues, right? Both climate change and justice, climate justice, environmental justice are both very big issues. And so allowing space for children to talk, and then also creating opportunities for students to take action, or as you mentioned, connecting them with examples through storytelling and through learning about other young people who are taking action. And that can be very inspiring.
Yeah, so do you have any examples of some people that we could use for this kind of age group that have made a difference to show like these really young kids that even at a young age, changes can be made?
That's a good question. So I think you and I had talked about little Miss Flint, who's now a teenager and has been doing amazing advocacy. Her name is Mary Copany, and she's been doing amazing advocacy work since she was, I think, 8 years old, around the Flint water crisis. And I think for young people to see, I mean, on one hand, it's an injustice that young people not only are experiencing this, but that young people need to take time away from being young people to advocate, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's very inspiring. and she continues as a teenager to press for climate justice, for environmental justice. So I think she's a really inspiring figure. I will touch on another figure a little bit later who, her name is Lily Platt. She's outside of the United States, not exactly a climate justice advocate. Although kind of peripherally, she's been focusing on plastic pollution, which does disproportionately impact disadvantaged and marginalized communities in the United States as well as globally. However, what she's been doing has been drawing attention to the issue of plastic pollution by documenting it. And she started, I think, when she was about 7 years old. She's outside of the US. She's based in the Netherlands, but I think she's also an inspiring figure. And then I don't think that these young folks need to be the same age as the students. I think sometimes that is inspiring, but perhaps even seeing people who are teens or adults or elders who are making change in the world today. And I think just connecting students to those stories provides the spark for action.
Yeah, so basically the main objectives that we've been trying to hit on for K through 5th graders is focusing on a storytelling aspect that kind of introduces them to the subject of climate change and climate justice in a way that doesn't pinpoint the blame for these issues directly on them, just kind of exposes them and allows them to feel empathy for those who are experiencing the struggles. So the next age group that we're going to be moving on to is the middle school years from 6th through 8th grade. And this would involve the transition into noticing inequalities and forming connections between those inequalities and the world around these students. So once again, there's 4 main objectives: introduce, demonstrate, represent, and discuss. And so in the introduce objective in 6th through 8th grade, we would start to teach the connections between those who live in neighborhoods that face the adverse effects of climate change and then their economic status, alongside bringing race into the conversation. So as Ms. McGrath noted in the previous slide, it is really difficult and controversial to bring about subjects of inequality in the United States. But when kids have already been exposed to the negative effects of climate change really young, like from K through 5th grade, before an opinion has been formed on the subject, when we start to integrate these kind of conversations into middle school, they're a lot more open to it because they don't have any predisposed bias on it because they've never been introduced to it. So the next thing that we do is move on to demonstrating. And since they're a little bit older now, you can start building maps with students of their own cities and areas and noticing the areas that face the most carbon pollution or environmental waste, and then start asking them to form connections. Like, what do they notice about these areas? What's the common trend that they see? And this lets students make the connection on their own and kind of leads them into the problem-solving mindset that we want students to have when they're looking at these issues. So then again, representing by using advocates of a similar age group to keep kids inspired and know that they can make a change no matter what age they are. And then finally, in discussing, we once again do the micro labs or mini discussions in 6th through 8th grade, since they're still a little on the young side, so that they can look through this journey where they can self-discover the issues that come with environmental racism and climate justice in the US, rather than just focusing on a completely teacher-led discussion. So again, Ms. McGrath, I wanted to ask, what do you think is one of the key differences that should be focused on when we're looking at elementary education versus middle school education? What should we start to hit on to prepare these students for a high school career in discovering the environmental injustices across the world?
So I think, again, I just want to reiterate that my expertise is not in elementary education. I've taught some middle school and the high school most of my career. But I did, before we met, talk with some colleagues who do have a little bit more expertise in the differences between environmental and the elementary and upper ages. And I think really what you're looking at is a similar type of structure, right? I have a colleague, Maria Fanfalis, who is a Canadian colleague, and she and I had a conversation about this yesterday, about how you can lay the framework for understanding that becomes more sophisticated in the upper grades. That framework can still exist at the lower ages, right? So I already mentioned the development of empathy, the ability to listen to and empathize with people who are either like or different from yourself. The knowledge that these are things that are happening, that are unjust, both climate change, the causes of climate change are unjust, the impacts of climate change are unjust, but to know that there are people who are fighters, who are involved in this fight, and to present opportunities for young people to talk about all of the feelings of maybe perhaps sadness, anger, motivation even, right? Or excitement about potentials for rectifying things that are not right. And I think we heard some of that with the previous group who just presented, and their level of enthusiasm and excitement that can come with change making. And I think just allowing the possibility for processing the emotions around all of these complex issues, and that makes the pathway for action, right? And so the difference is really in ages is a level of complexity and how much a level of challenge that you want to present to the students, right? But yeah, all of that framework can be laid from a very early age, because the research has shown that students are aware of injustices at quite young ages. Mm-hmm. And so what are we doing as educators to lay a different foundation for students?
Mm-hmm. So basically what we've been talking about is that from elementary to middle school, these are the two kind of sections where we're focusing on teaching students the foundations before they get to high school and they start to learn about the really, really heavy hitting subjects that they're now ready to experience. So we're going to move on to that age group, 9th through 12th grade. And this is probably the most important age bracket that we're going to be focusing on today, because this is where problem solving and creating change makers is happening. So the four main objectives in 9th through 12th grade are a little different. So we're elaborating, integrating, representing, and discussing. So through elaborating, since students are already aware through middle school, forming connections between environmental disparities and their own communities, we start by assigning students readings from various resources, which I'm going to touch on a little bit at the end of this presentation, and ask them to present their thoughts on why environmental injustices occur. And so since students have been kind of fed this non-biased approach to climate justice education throughout the entirety of their education up to this point, they're able to present in a way that doesn't cause controversies in the classroom, but also present their own perspective and kind of get a perspective from everyone around them. And so after that, we will move into integrating. And this is where we build climate education into various subjects, not just core subjects, and teach students how they can make small differences in their communities. And integrating is one of Ms. McGrath's areas of expertise. So we're going to touch on that with her as soon as we go through the last two. And then once again, representing through advocates of a similar age group, because that's always inspiring to students. And finally, in discussing, these mini labs and micro discussions are focused on specific environmental injustice issues And the presentations are once again focusing on a problem-solving side. So now these students give presentations on how they believe they can aid in fixing the issue. And this teaches kids that not only are these issues, really important to address, but they don't just have to talk about them. Instead, they can discuss ways where they can actually make a change, and in classrooms start to integrate those changes so that they can see how their own actions can have an impact. So I know, Ms. McGrath, you integrate climate education into your art teaching. So let's talk a little bit about that and how you've done that.
Sure. Would you mind going to the next slides? Because I'm just gonna since I'm an art teacher, I'm a visual person, so I wanted to share this with you. So last year, I wrote curriculum for an organization called Subject to Climate, which I would highly recommend for everyone. I was working on their New Jersey specific lessons that address the new climate change standards for New Jersey. And at the end, we have a list of resources, and it's in that list that you can find Subject to Climate. You can research a lot of different topics related to climate change, related to climate justice, as well as targeted lessons or resources for specific age levels. So the particular unit that I wrote I called it Climate Heroes. And I guess my thinking behind this is what Meghana is talking about with, connecting with role models, right, can be very impactful for young people. And for some young folks might be stuck in this kind of phase of like, I know there's climate injustice. I know climate change is happening. I know it's disproportionately affecting people. I don't know what to do, right? But to showcase what young people are doing and have been doing can be super impactful. It can be super motivating. So the lesson, or a unit plan that I wrote, which is broken down into multiple lessons, has the opportunity for students to do their own research. Some students might already be aware of youth climate leaders, but just go back one slide. And if you could just back the other way, click on the link there. Yeah. So I don't know if it's going to work. Yeah. Okay. So this is a Padlet that I created. Some of you are familiar with Padlets. And it's just curated resources that I created about climate and environmental justice leaders who are young people. And so what I've done with this lesson that I piloted with a group of students last summer was just kind of let them loose on the Padlet, and they could kind of bounce around until the idea was to find a young person that they connected with. And so now you can go back to the slides. So after students researched and connected with a specific youth climate
No, I think we lost her, maybe with the connection or her audio. Her video is frozen.
Using painting to be expressive and so on. So I'm going to share. Ooh, am I breaking up or?
I think just for a second there, but we can hear you now.
Okay. So these are a few examples of the portraits that my students that I worked with. Again, it was a pilot I did last summer. I have been integrating climate change, climate justice issues for the last several years, but this was one I specifically wrote for Subject to Climate, and I wanted to test it out before I implemented it. And since I teach introductory level students, I wanted students who had already gone through a whole year of introductory art before they we're at the point of creating this portrait. And so the students I have now in my intro art classes are going to be embarking on this project shortly, which I'm super excited about. So these are 3 examples from students. Isra Hersey, and she is a youth climate activist from Minnesota. Daphne Frias, and the last.
Is it working? I think I'm on the last one.
Okay. And Naomi Morris, who is a youth climate activist from Uganda. And one of the really amazing parts about this lesson is that through posting the artwork, the students connected with the actual people in some cases. So we've had a connection with Naomi through social media, through the artwork that my student created, which has been super engaging and exciting for us to have that exchange. Next slide. So I just wanted to talk briefly, and then we're going to transition into talking about Nyla's experiences at the high school level with climate justice. I also teach a class called World Art, and we explore the art of Indigenous cultures globally. And last year, this was a lesson that we did where we looked at the art of the South Pacific. Students took some inspiration from art of the South Pacific. In this case, we were looking at the use of carved pendants in South Pacific Island cultures. And students in my classes needed to develop a symbolic pendant of their own. And so on the right, this was a student project. And concurrently with this project, I had students research the impacts of climate change on the cultures that they were learning about. And so that's been a really natural connection for me to teach about specific cultures and then to say, well, what's going on in that culture today? And one major thing in so many Indigenous cultures globally is climate change. And so that's been a real natural connection. So I wanted to turn it over to Nyla, who's going to just share about your experiences in other classes.
Thank you, Ms. McGrath. So I think I really just wanted to share my experience at Hopewell Valley Central High School, and specifically like in my junior year, how climate activism, climate justice has been integrated into my learning. So right now I'm taking AP Language and Composition, AP US History, as well as a French class. And in those 3 classes, I've really had a great experience learning about climate justice in ways that I didn't originally think would be something that I would end up doing. So like, for example, in my English class, we're able to look not only at like the rhetorical situation and the argumentation of a document, but we're also able to learn about climate justice and different activists. So like a couple months ago, we learned about Catherine Coleman Flowers, who's an activist from Lowndes County, Alabama, who talks, like when we read her book called Waste, and where she talks about wastewater and the effects on Black and Brown communities, as well as in my APISH class, we learned about like civil rights and how that coincided with the environmental movement. And so I think overall, the way in which our school does it in integrating climate justice and just learning about multiple different perspectives when it comes to climate justice and climate activism has really inspired me to do more in my community, and really just exposed me to something that I never really had the chance to learn about before. So I definitely think it's an important part of learning experience and something that all students should be able to learn about.
So Nyla, I know we talked a little bit about in our talk yesterday, but my school doesn't really have the same experiences or the same kind of learning that you've had with climate justice education. Mm-hmm. So what do you think, would you, if you hadn't had the experience to have this integrated climate education in your curriculum, do you think you or other students would have taken the initiative to learn about it by themselves? Or do you think having it not only has helped you learn about it, but has inspired you to take action and would benefit students across the country?
Yeah, I definitely think that the fact that we have been so immersed in like learning about climate justice and activism, like I think it's definitely exposed me to something that I probably wouldn't have, found on my own. Like I wouldn't have been able to read so much about like Catherine Coleman and the stuff that's going on in Alabama. So I definitely think having climate justice and climate activism in curriculums really helps to foster that like curiosity for issues that happen with these things. And just looking at the chat, I have a question. So do you know how your teachers decided? Yeah, I think when it comes to English, we are learning about like argumentation and how people can kind of articulate themselves and spread information. So I think overall we're kind of doing like a justice unit. It's like coinciding with like, so environmental justice as well as like civil rights, the civil rights movement. So I think because it's such a current topic and something that still is super, it's something that we have to worry about and something that is still very much like present in our lives. I think that's probably how my teacher chose to teach us about it. Yeah.
So thank you, Nyla, for your perspective on that. So clearly, it really benefits students to have that opportunity to learn about climate justice in an education setting where they're exposed to it, in school without any biases being presented to them, rather than their first exposure to a lot of these issues being through things like social media, where there's going to be biases present and you never get the full story. So like I said before, there are some resources for educators that I've linked on this slide. So there's a lot of books about climate change for younger students that teachers can use, especially because it's really hard to kind of build that in at such a young age without overwhelming students. And like Ms. McGrath was talking about, there's lesson plan ideas online for how teachers can start to integrate this kind of education for students who are both young and in high school, and other resources that teachers should be focused on integrating when they're talking about climate justice. But yeah, Ms. McGrath, do you have any final thoughts before we end this presentation?
So just to follow up with Nyla's question, so it's interesting the content of the You Read Waste, right? Nyla, that was the book by Catherine Coleman Flowers. And I almost wonder if the origins of that came out of, we have something called Hopewell Valley Green Week, or Hopewell Valley, it's the school district's Green Week. And I know that the supervisor for English, for example, was involved a couple of years ago. Our focus for the week district-wide was climate justice. That was that, or environmental and climate justice, kind of more broadly. It's called Waste, and it's by Catherine Coleman Flowers. And I know that we talked about that book. Another excellent resource is and this is a New Jersey focus, it's a film called The Sacrifice Zone. And I know that having those conversations district-wide, students were involved in, administrators were involved in, and we also invited folks who are doing work in the community that are in those spaces of overlap between environmental and racial justice into the conversation. And so it's heartening to me to hear, like, I don't know that it's a direct impact, but I wonder if there's a connection between those conversations continuing to echo years later. So I guess my point is just talk to other students, talk to other educators, talk to people in the community, have those conversations. And, you know, this curriculum that Nyla's talking about didn't exist 5 years ago. So have those conversations and make space and normalize this.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think that a lot of times some of the inhibitions that people have with integrating climate education, especially climate justice education, is like Ms. McGrath said, like, you know, the fear that there isn't enough awareness for students to receive this education well. But when they're taught from such a young age and being exposed to it in a setting with other students, like Nyla said, not only are they able to learn about the actual subject, but they're also able to gain a lot of exposure into real world issues that are affecting millions across the US. So yeah, thank you so much, Ms. McGrath, for today's interview, and thank you, Nyla, for coming on. That was the end of this presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carolyn, Meghana, Nyla, for bringing together such diverse issues and really considerations that we need to have collectively to think about how we can both thoughtfully and concretely, and I mean, mostly also practically, really engage learners in these issues. So that was really a fantastic way to end our summit. And thank you so much for your reflections and sharing your experiences as well. So it seems like our past 2.5 days went by very quickly, but that brings us to the end of this summit. We were also really hoping, in addition to hearing from just, you know, really thought leaders and educators and youth in this field, one of the things we really wanted was to connect everyone together. So we hope that you feel like you were able to connect, and there are some follow-ups and meaningful conversations that could come out as a result of this summit. It's always so encouraging to see such passionate sustainability leaders and educators who are just continuing their work day in and day out and continuing that fight. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being with us. For those of you who have stuck around since the beginning, it's been a long few days, but a very, very packed and impactful, I think. So from one of our organization side, I'll share some links where you can stay connected with us, and I'll hand it over to our colleagues at SDSN who can also share some other announcements and links as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hayan, and thank you to everyone for joining today. It's been a really engaging and wonderfully surprising for me in many ways couple of days, and I really enjoyed the final sessions. Just bear with me for another 1 minute to acknowledge some people who did incredible work leading into today. I'm just so appreciative and want to acknowledge you, Hayan, Jasmine, Sonia, and of course, Radhika, for your leadership and steering of the event. It is not often that I get to go on vacation for a week before a major event and not even be like getting texts or any kind of concern. You guys were on it, and it was really incredible. It was really a group effort and a beautifully working together kind of team. And I am just so thankful to have worked with all of you on this. I also want to thank the organizing committee for their dedication over the past many months to building this event and designing this event, as well as everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to just so thoughtfully engage with SDSN USA, the Center for Sustainable Development, and towards Mission 4.7. Finally, I'd just also like to acknowledge the leadership of SDSN USA co-chair Helen Bond. Thank you, Helen, for your remarks yesterday and your participation throughout the event and leading up to it as well. We're soon going to be announcing another upcoming event related to race and SDGs that Helen is spearheading, and I'm really excited for that. And it's so linked to much of the discussion earlier today that I suggest, if you're interested, that everyone stay tuned for that announcement coming soon. The programming and passion of speakers and attendees has been phenomenal throughout these days. I'm leaving with a lot of questions, ideas, excitement, and thinking about what's possible and necessary in transforming education in the US. This includes asking the why are we transforming, and remembering that while COVID has revealed many challenges and exacerbated inequalities across the system, it has also demonstrated that radical change is possible for us to achieve quickly. And that's a takeaway that I'm going to be thinking about in the coming days. This is not an event where the work ends right now as we're closing. This begins another chapter of the work for the USA Mission 4.7 Community of Practice, and hopefully can serve as an example of what's possible for a network activating towards this global mission that we can take forward globally as well. So we welcome all of you still here on the line to continue to engage with us on this difficult and critical task of transforming education, and engage with this community of practice as well going forward. On that note, I hope you'll share your feedback on the summit with us via the survey that I think Sonia is sharing a link to in the chat. Thank you so much, Sonia. We will be also hosting our next networking coffee chat, which we do monthly. The next one is this coming Tuesday, February 28th, and it will be a great opportunity to learn more about the network, meet other people working in this space. But as I said, we do host that monthly, so please, you're welcome to join in anytime going forward. And we just hope to continue to engage with you and build on the success of these past few days to really move towards this mission of transforming education and achieving SDG 4. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.